So I've been really reflecting on our current situation. I was reading Facebook, which is always an interesting place to go. I'm reading some comments that people had made, just having conversations with people about how it just feels, if anything, harder now than it did back in March. In a way, the sense of low-level anxiety, almost a slight despair at the situation that we find ourselves in. The concern of what will it mean if we have another lockdown, that sort of anxiety. It's a difficult time to live, isn't it? It's a difficult time to be alive. And whereas before it felt like we were very united, there was the clapping for the NHS, there was a real move to serve and support people who were isolating and had need. It feels like everything's a little bit more fragmented. There's more kind of frustration at the decisions that are being made, and so we find ourselves in a really interesting and difficult, I think, time in our life, and so it kind of got me thinking about growth. And I just felt God asked me a little question: can we grow in a time of crisis? And so I want to spend a little bit of time this week, each morning, just asking that question: can we grow in a time of crisis? And if so, how? How do we grow in a time of crisis? Like everything, it's always good to go back to the scriptures, to go back to the Bible. And when we read the Bible, when we read the story of Jesus, when we read the story of the apostles, we see people who lived in a time of real challenge and difficulty. I mean, let's face it, so hard was the society that Jesus was born into that he was constantly worried of imprisonment and ultimately crucifixion, which of course he knew that was where he was going. He knew that is what he needed to do for all of us. But it must have been horrendously difficult. You can't imagine what it must be like knowing that one day you will be caught and crucified. So Jesus knew what it meant to live in a time of crisis. And so he raised up apostles who would ultimately go on to plant the church and to see it grow and multiply across the earth ultimately, but certainly across their part of the world in the early days. And he knew that he was raising up apostles, leaders, into a time that was really difficult, where they would face imprisonment and possibly even death. But yet they grew. You could argue they even thrived. And why was that? How did they do that? How did they, in a time of difficult challenge, from their perspective, a time of crisis, how did they grow? And I think that's where I want to go this week. I want us to have a think about how can we grow in our relationship with God as a human being in a time of such challenge and crisis. So here's a couple of questions just to think about today, to reflect upon. First question is, do you want to grow in a time of crisis? Do you want to grow as a human being, as a follower of Jesus? Do you want to grow? And if so, then how are we going to grow? What is God speaking to you about? What is God saying? Maybe you're not a Christian and you're listening to this, and so I'd ask you, what aspects of your life are you noticing that maybe you've never noticed before? You think, well, actually, I could really do with growing in that area. So I want to finish with those two questions. Do you want to grow? And if so, maybe what are you seeing about your life, about your faith in Jesus, that is just an aspect that you think, I would just love to be better or grow in that area? So are you going to choose to grow? Are you going to want to grow, and are you going to choose to grow? They're the things I would love you to have a think about today, and then we'll pick up some more thoughts tomorrow.